talk about Plymouth Villages. And so this is our first session where we actually have people here in person at the library. I am just so excited to actually see faces this time. And we also have everybody joining us from Zoom as well. Thank you. So I'm gonna get going because we have, again, a lot to talk about with Plymouth Villages. First off, I want to, before we get going, I should thank Kelsey Casey, who is doing all of the tech stuff in the background, which helps me immensely, so I can just concentrate on giving you guys a great program about Plymouth. So we are doing North and West Plymouth today. And let's just move ahead. And so we are going to start out and we are going to get on to the Plymouth and Kingston Street Railway. So this was a street trolley railway service that was organized in 1886 at a meeting at Samoset House. If you were here for my first presentation, Samoset House was one of the large hotels that was built for the burgeoning Plymouth tourism. And so this trolley system was really supposed to provide local service. And it started out going from Plymouth to Kingston, and then it extended all the way to Brockton. So we're gonna hop on the trolley, and we are basically just heading all the way up Court Street. We're following the trolley line. And our first stop, we are gonna take a look at Cold Spring neighborhood. It was named after the brook that runs right through that area. And it's roughly sandwiched between Plymouth Center and North Plymouth. It's that neighborhood that's sort of in between. So we're going to head to, I should just look back. We are going to look at this little beauty right here. And that is the Forefathers Monument. It is 81-foot tall solid granite statue. It is the tallest solid granite statue in the world. And it was completed in 1888 by Hammett Billings. He was a Boston architect and a sculptor, and his name may sound familiar because he also designed the original canopy over the Plymouth Rock. So the figures here are supposed to represent faith, morality, education, law, and liberty. Just some good, strong Puritan values there. And it was dedicated to the Mayflower Pilgrims. So this statue was commissioned by the Pilgrim Society, but it's now owned and maintained by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and it is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And then we cannot leave this area before we take a look at the home of Mr. William T. Davis. And I just want to point out this very, sorry, squiggly little line right here circling his home right at the foot of the Forefathers Monument. And William T. Davis was really our town's historian. His work that he did was instrumental in a lot of the research that I did, but has been just so helpful for local historians. He was so meticulous and he was so dedicated. He wrote 3 histories that I use constantly: the Ancient Landmarks of Plymouth, the History of the Town of Plymouth, and Plymouth Memories of an Octogenarian. We have all of those publications here at the library if you want to use them. So he was a businessman, but his love was Plymouth history. And so he was involved in many town organizations and philanthropic causes. But by day, he was an attorney, a banker, and a merchant. I love this Italianate style home that he had here. Unfortunately, we no longer have this building, so we can only enjoy it in these old maps. Next up, we are going to head down to Nelson Park. And before it was the beach scene that it is today, it was a camping ground. And so during the 1920s, you could come with your car and set up your tent, and you could still visit Plymouth and take in everything that we had to offer, even if you couldn't afford the rather posh, large hotels that we had. So it's still very popular today. It's still where families meet. We've got the beach splash pad and the playground there. I brought my kids there when they were little. And they also, it's the starting point for the North Plymouth Rail Trail, which was recently renamed the Grace Trail. And it follows the old train line that goes all the way up to Cordage Park. And I should just give an acknowledgement to Jim Baker, our lovely local historian who has written multiple books that I have available for you guys to take a look at. They are available in the library, but he has a wonderful website called jbscorner.com. And he very kindly gave me permission to use some of the images from that website. If you are at all interested in Plymouth history and some of the buildings that we have lost, it is a great resource. All right. So we are continuing on the trolley up Court Street. And some of you may be familiar with this site right here. This is the, it was at one point the Sleepy Pilgrim Motel, now part of the Best Western Cold Spring complex. But even before these motor lodges kind of came to Plymouth in the 1950s, a lot of local families were taking advantage of all of the tourism, tourists that were coming into town, and open up their homes and rent out extra bedrooms to visitors. And in the case, we've got Howland Lodge right here, right on Court Street. And doing a little bit of research, I found that Louis Howland, he was listed as a painter in the town directories, but it looks like he and his wife Mary also took advantage of having a little side business and had some like a lodge. And just so you can get an idea of what it looks like today, we're going to just move over here and you can take a view. This is right on Court Street. And this is what Howland Lodge looks like today. All right. And then a little bit further up on Court Street, we get to the Cold Spring School, originally built in 1895. But then later on, it becomes the First Church of Christ Scientist, and that's when this extra little portico gets added in the front. And today, we still have this building, and it was purchased by J. James Auctioneers, and it's now a wedding venue. And this is where the auctioneers, he has his auctions in the building as well. So we're still lucky to have this one. Oh, let's just take a look at what it looks like today. There it is. Still in some really nice condition. It hasn't really changed much. Okay, and now we're moving up a little bit. We are now looking at Knapp School. So this was constructed in the early 1900s, and it originally served North Plymouth as its elementary school. And then a lot of people in Plymouth remember it as the home of the Ellis Curtain Company from the 1950s up to about 2012. Yeah. So today, this building, like a lot of the large buildings downtown, it has been converted into condos. And it's been very sympathetically converted to condos, so very nicely adaptively reused. And we can take a look at this quickly as well, so we can see what it looks like today. And there it is. And it looks like at some point it went from 2 stories down to 1 story. I'm not quite sure when that happened. All right. And so now we're going to head into the heart of North Plymouth. With this postcard, we're looking at the intersection of Court Street and Sowoso Lane. And many people still remember North Plymouth as being a walking village. For most people, everything that they needed was right there. It was a vibrant and what's the word I'm looking for? Just very active. Everything you needed. There were grocers, so many grocers, oh my goodness. Bakers, clothing stores, barbers, there was a theater, a bank, there were social clubs. You walked to whatever you needed. Men walked to work, the children walked to school. One of my youngest went to Hedge School, and to this day, there's still no busing. It is considered a walking school. I love that that is still the tradition there. And in doing some of the research for this area, it makes sense, but I was absolutely stunned by, I was looking at the Sanborn fire maps. And those were maps that were produced to create different insurance rates for buildings. They're a fantastic resource because they give you so much information about the buildings at the time. And what I noticed is that there were so many bakeries. It's so many of them. It was, I can just, imagine the smell and everything coming from that. And one thing I really should mention is that the history of North Plymouth is always going to be tied with the Plymouth Cordage Company. It was such an integral part of the history, the culture of that area. There were immigrant groups that came in the early 20th century, Italians, Portuguese, Cape Verdeans, Azorians, and Germans, and to a lesser extent, there were Irish that came in as well. And all of that mixed together and contributed to the culture of North Plymouth. And I just want to get a view of what it looks like today. And this is right about where we are from that postcard, taking a look straight down Court Street. And it's hard to see from here, but we're going to take a look at, well, next block down. And, all right. The Opera House. So this was built in 1909. And again, while I was doing some research a couple of years ago, I came across the fact that North Plymouth had an opera house. I was floored. And then I found out that the building is still there. I was so excited. So what I found out was that it started out as like a social center and for presentations. But it then quickly kind of moved into the vaudeville and movie theater. And so it was one of the 2 theaters that was owned by Charlie Moaning. He owned the Old Colony Theater right downtown Plymouth, and then this one. So the theater had 600 seats. And again, it was very popular for the village. People would go, the big movie night was Tuesday, and everybody would go to the movies on a Tuesday night because Fridays was when everybody got paid from cordage, and the shops in North Plymouth were opened late till about 9 o'clock, and everybody went out and they got all of their shopping done on a Friday night. So actually Tuesday was the big movie night in North Plymouth. So the building is still there, like I said, and it's now been switched to commercial use, and people will recognize it as where the cleanest is located. And let's see if we can get a good view of this. This one was hard to capture, but there it is. So the brickwork is still there, still lovely. And so we're just lucky to have this gem still there. And then moving up a little bit on Court Street, we're still on our trolley. We get to St. Mary's Church, and that served the North Plymouth Catholic community since about 1915. And the Holy Ghost Society formed in 1929, and they are the ones that host the annual Holy Ghost Festa. And it's usually the third Sunday in July. I know they didn't have it last year. I haven't seen anything about it happening this year, unfortunately. But it is a fantastic festival that it celebrates Saint Queen Isabel of Portugal. And she was known for providing relief to her people in Portugal in the 13th century when there was a large famine. So she prayed to the Holy Ghost for relief for her people. And then ships laden with grain just kind of showed up. And so that is how the Holy Ghost Festival came about and celebrated. So it's celebrated by, they have services at the church. And then there is a parade that goes straight up Cherry Street to the Holy Ghost Field. And that is where Portuguese culture is celebrated. There is food and music and dancing. It's a really fantastic time. It's very inclusive. They like having everybody come to it and celebrate. All right, and then we're just taking a quick peek down Cherry Street. And this is at the corner of Standish and Hedge. And it's the oldest Plymouth school that is still in operation. And I have a soft spot for Hedge School because one of mine went there. And it's just still very much a part of the village. And so it was named for Isaac Hedge. He was one of the early landowners right there. And it was really built because there was so much overcrowding happening at the Knapp and the Bourne schools because of all of the cordage families that were coming. The cordage company was really growing. Families were growing. The schools were getting overcrowded. And so Hedge School was built. But even with that, they still had to make some additions pretty early on after that, just to handle all of that. So now we get to Cordage Company. And like I said, this is such a part of the history of North Plymouth. So it was established in 1824 by Bourne Spooner. Here he is right here, rather stern looking fellow. But by the late 19th century, the company was the largest manufacturer of rope and twine. Utterly amazing that that's part of Plymouth's history. And so it was very popular because it was so well made, and it was used in fishing and in shipping and in agriculture. So there were so many uses for their products. And so the Cordage Company was also Plymouth's largest employer for over 100 years. So not only North Plymouth, but a good part of Plymouth itself owes its success to the Cordage Company. So the Cordage Company went out of business in 1964, and then the 45-acre property was converted to retail and office space, now known as the Cordage Center. And I have to give a plug to the Plymouth Cordage Museum. Fantastic. They are located right in Cordage Center. They've got limited hours, but it is well worth it. And I looked on their website and it looks like they are still open. So I highly recommend you guys going out there if you can. It is a very fantastic little gem of Plymouth history. So the Cordage Company in its 140-year history, it only suffered from one strike within that time frame. And this was due because the company adopted a social and welfare system very early on. As early as 1825, Warren Spooner realized that given the location of the company, he was going to have to provide housing for his workers. And he built good quality, sturdy housing. And over here on this side, you can see a lot of the worker housing here. A lot of these connected buildings right here, and then the duplexes. And we're very lucky we still have a lot of these today in North Plymouth. So there were several waves of, as the company grew, they had to keep building more housing. So there was another push, I believe, in the late 1800s, and then another push in 1910, 1920 to build housing in North Plymouth. So the housing was just really the beginning of what Cordage provided for its workers. It built Harris Hall in 1902 to serve as the cafeteria for its employees. It was still a company where most people walked home for lunch and walked back to work. But there were enough bachelors that did not have anybody to go home to. They asked if they could have a place where they could bring their lunch pail and eat. And so then Harris Hall gets built. And it was so successful that by 1949, they were serving over 200 full dinners a day. And then the building also served as entertainment space. They had concerts, theatricals, lectures, dances, retirement parties, all of that. And it wasn't just the Cordage Company that used this building, but there were other town members. Anybody could rent out the hall and use it. No, we don't. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. But it was right at the opening to where the driveway goes into Cordage now. It was right there. So now we're looking at the Loring Library, which was built in 1899. This was really one of the first educational projects that the company started. It started with 3,000 volumes, and most of them were in other languages that reflected the diversity of their workers. And then other projects that happened later on, they had a free kindergarten for the children of their employees. They had a gymnasium that was fully equipped for the kids to use. They started a carpentry school for the boys, and the girls had home economics classes. So a lot of cooking classes, those were the popular ones. There was also a lot to do as far as recreation that the Cordage Company provided for its workers. Always something to do in the off hours. They built a bathhouse that people could use while they were visiting the beach right there. The bathhouse had swimming instructors to make sure that the employees' children learned how to swim. But there was also a Cordage band. There was a men's club that had bowling alleys and pool tables. And there were sports fields. So there was a baseball team and there were football teams. And it looks like the baseball teams kind of played against the baseball teams of the other mills in the town. So there was kind of some rivalry going on there. And all of the goings on at Cordage, you could read in the company newsletter right here. And so this was from about 1945 to 1954. And I am very happy to say that these have been digitized and they're available through the library website. If you go to plymouthpubliclibrary.org, they are a fantastic read and really just a lovely snapshot of North Plymouth history. And also for the workers, if you were feeling under the weather, they had 2 visiting nurses. And then later on, they had a doctor on premises. And when it became your time to retire, they had a pension system waiting for you. So they really took care of not only their workers, but the families. And the cordage company was really known for that. And there we go. So we are now going to continue moving forward up Court Street, and we're now looking at the Zion Evangelical Lutheran Church, which was founded in 1888 by the German families who settled in North Plymouth. And most of those worked at the cordage company. So the services were mostly in German, except for 2 Sundays per month, they had it in English. And let's see, I was going to show today. Okay. So now we're just going to talk a little bit about Seaside. So Seaside, you can see it right here, designated. And this was a name for the northernmost section of North Plymouth. It's North Plymouth, if you will. And it really seems to be associated with the cordage company and all of the housing and the buildings that supported cordage. It seems to be on maps for about 50 years, and then it drops away. And there are many Plymouth people who don't even know that it was a place in Plymouth at one point. However, we can take a look. I love these bird's eye maps. They're fantastic. So it labels Seaside right here in 1897, and we've got cordage and all of its buildings right here. And we have Seaside Railroad Station right here, and the post office, which is this little building right here. And then this is the back side of the railroad station that we're looking at. And this was on Boundary Street. And it's literally on the boundary of Plymouth and Kingston. The boundary actually kind of cuts the Seaside station right in half, and it kind of goes diagonal along right in here. But we no longer have these buildings, and the name kind of fell out of disuse. Okay, so now we are hopping onto the catboat. We are off the trolley now, and we're going to head over to Clark's Island, which is right in Plymouth Harbor. And this right here is Clark's Island, and this is the earliest map that I could find it actually labeled. And this is about 1775 for this map right here. So just to orient, we've got Gurnet right in here, Clark's Island, and then Long Beach right in here. So this is a view from Saquesh and looking at Clark's Island. And Clark's Island was named after John Clark. He was the first mate on the Mayflower. And the story is that he was the first person to put his foot on shore. It was named after him. But while the Mayflower was still an anchor in the harbor, a group was sent out to find a suitable settlement area. And they got hit by a storm. And they sought refuge on Clark's Island. And the following day after the storm was over, it was a Sunday. So they could not repair their boat and get back to the Mayflower. They decided they were going to have a service. So even before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock, they landed at Clark's Island. And this is the site of the first Sabbath on Clark's Island. And it was right here. The story goes, it happened right here on Pulpit Rock on Clark's Island. And that was on December 9th, 1620. And so then the scouting group had their service on Sunday. And then they were able to fix their boat and get back to the Mayflower, and then go on to land at Plymouth Rock. So this is really, if you want to say, the original Plymouth Rock. So the rock is on Clark's Island, which is now mostly privately owned. So it's kind of difficult to kind of get there to take a look at this, but there is an inscription on the rock with words taken from William Bradford's journal. On the Sabbath day, we rested. And so now we're back on the boat and we are going to head over to Gurnet Point right there. And Gurnet Light Station was started in 1768. It was twin lighthouses. They were rebuilt in 1801 and then again in 1843. They were doing improvements to the lights, and so they greeted the ships in Plymouth Harbor. The twin night lights were very well known. But in 1924, one of the lighthouses had to be taken down. And the remaining lighthouse was then given a much stronger beacon. So even though it was more functional, many people still lamented the loss of the twin lights. So we are now going to head back to land. We're going to hop on our boat again, and we're going to land in Plymouth Center, right on the waterfront, and we're going to start exploring West Plymouth. And we are going to do this by canoe, and we are going to start heading up Town Brook and getting really into West Plymouth. If you remember my first session, I talked a little bit about Town Brook and Summer Street and the village, the neighborhood there. Robinson Iron Works was really sort of my ending spot. So we're going to start there this time. Really not in West Plymouth, but on the way to West Plymouth. So it was actually started in 1792 by Nathaniel Brimmer. It was a rolling and slitting mill. And then later in 1866, it switched to the Robinson Iron Works and was really quite expanded to this large complex that you see today. So it was on the corner of Newfield and Summer Street. And so this whole complex suffered severe damage in 1905 when the Town Brook Dam broke through. And all of the buildings are gone today, and it's now the site of the new skate park and the updated playground right on Newfield Street. So really getting deeper into West Plymouth, along Town Brook, you know, it was really late 19th centuries when you really start seeing the mills developed quite a bit here. They just took advantage of the water source there. So all along Town Brook, from the beginning at Billington Sea, all the way down to where it goes out into Plymouth Harbor, mills happening all along. So it really was quite an industrial area. And the Plymouth Mills is sort of the first one in West Plymouth, I would say. And it started as an ironworks in 1800. It had a series of owners over the years, but it produced mostly iron and steel goods, nails, tacks, rivets, things like that, up until about 1926. And then the buildings were leased to other businesses. The Ellis Curtin Company was one of them. I think that was its original location before it moved over to the Knapp School. But then the buildings burned down in 1966. So there is really not much evidence that there was a mill in this location. And then the next mill up was the Standish Mill. It started out as a cotton mill in 1812, but by 1893 it switched to woolen goods. And on the map here, you can just see, I mean, these mill complexes were huge. Not only the mills, but all of the supporting buildings. And they are all gone at this point. So the Standish Mill, it was never as large as Cordage, but it was still a large employer for the town. And it really did not survive the Great Depression. They were really hoping that once that was over with some of the federal programs that they were going to start up again, and it never really was able to get that done. So all the mill buildings were demolished in 1937. So we have this lovely interior photo, thanks to Jim Baker. So you can get an idea of the workers and what they did. And we're just going to take a street view today, just so you can get an idea of what is not there now. Yep, it is all. So there has been quite a bit of work here done by conservationists, returning this area back to its natural state. So a lot of the dams have been removed, and a lot of the mill ponds have been reduced so that it's more of a natural brook feature. And it is an area that's used quite a bit for hiking. All right. So now we're getting to Deepwater Bridge. And this is, we're on Billington Street now, still following the town brook. And Deepwater Bridge, it's right where Billington crosses over Town Brook. And so this was an area that was the water source for North America's first aqueduct here in Plymouth. Can you believe it? It's amazing. So it was chartered in 1796. It was built by Caleb Leach. The pipes were made of hollowed out yellow pine, tapered at one end so it could fit into the next. And that was all the way down Town Brook to bring water into Plymouth Center. Very forward thinking. And so now we are just a little bit up on Billington Street, and we get to Morton Park. And Morton Park was the town's first public park. And it was established in 1889, and it was made possible by Nathaniel Morton and others who donated a considerable chunk of land along Billington Sea and Little Pond. It was a popular destination for Plymouth and its burgeoning tourist trade, but it is still very popular today. Again, another spot to go with your family and just enjoy nature. And so through the postcards, you can see that it really has some spectacular scenery. And one part of Plymouth's tourism was the history, but another big chunk that we forget about is all of the outdoor sports. And the ponds really supported a lot of these outdoor sports. So for people that like to do hunting, fishing, and boating, the Plymouth ponds that was the place to go, and still is. All right, so further up on Billington Street, we get to the Lout Pond Pumping Station, built in 1855, and this was built to replace the Plymouth Aqueduct and so now instead of the pine pipes, we're now iron pipes. And the iron pipes, they followed that same route. It's still just kind of used a lot of the gravity to bring that water down into Plymouth Center. And I just want you to take note of this right here, because that's where we are now. We are on the top where this guy right here. And we are looking out across, this is the Lout Pond Pumping Station. And this is Lout Pond. It was originally called Patuxent Lake. And then we have Billington Sea beyond. And you can see how lush it is there, just beautiful site. And so with all of the trees, it was also a very practical location for the watchtower. This is where they looked out for any fires. So it's up on high ground for that reason. All right, so now we were right about here. This is Billington, and we were right here near Lout Pond. And we're gonna head north a little bit, and we're heading to, I'm sorry, another one of my awful squiggly circles. And we are going to, it's very hard to read, but it says Hillside, and that's where we're heading next. So this is Hillside, built in 1845. It is on the National Register since 1975. And it's just a lovely example of just the Gothic cottage style, very popular right at this time period. But again, another Plymouth first, it was one of the nation's first garden nurseries called the Old Colony Gardens, and it was started by Benjamin Watson. And this house was designed by Samuel Longfellow, who was the brother to Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Benjamin Watson was just a supporter of the Transcendentalist movement, and he had lots of big name visitors to Hillside. So Ralph Waldo Emerson, Louisa May Alcott and her father, Amos Bronson Alcott, and Henry David Thoreau. Also, a lot of notable abolitionists came, and a lot of from the suffrage movement as well. Right here in Plymouth, was still very involved in these very current events and movements that were happening in the day. And going more north, we get to Nick's Rock. This is right on the border of Plymouth and Kingston, right near Route 80 along there, and where 44 now is. So it was one of the limestones. It was one of the natural features to designate the boundary line. So it was described as having a 12 by 15 foot flat top. And it was a popular place to go to have picnics, much like Pulpit Rock was as well. So if I have learned one thing by doing this research, Plymouth loves its rocks. I counted 7 at this point. By the end of the series, I will be talking about 7 rocks in Plymouth. So the rock disappeared at some point. And that is also right where that sand works, that big P.L. Edwards or whatever. And so we suspect that that's what happened to the rock at some point. Don't know, but it is a suspicion. But there's now a marker on the median of Route 44. And I tried to find the location of the marker. I know I have driven by it. So if anybody knows, it's kind of driving me crazy that I couldn't find it. But we can just take a look a little bit where we're at. So Nick's Rock was right around, there's Nick's Rock Road right there. And there we have all of this sand and gravel works right in here. So it seems kind of a likely demise to Nick's Rock. All right. So now we're going to head into the Darby Pond area, and this is tucked into the northwest corner of Plymouth. It's a very quiet little corner, but it has what I think is one of Plymouth's most amazing stories to tell. And I just want to get your attention to this little dot right here, location, this house, and look at the name Burr. And here it is over here, and Turner. And this is right on the Kingston line. So we have an image of the Turner Burr house, and this is the last surviving structure as part of the settlement known as Parting Ways. This last building burned down in 1909. But Parting Ways, called that because it's right on the crossover to Plymouth. But it was an African-American settlement of freedmen in Plymouth. Most of these freeman towns you find after the Civil War. However, this one dates to just after the Revolutionary War, one of the first ones in the nation. And it was founded on 94 acres by 4 African-American families. They fought in the Revolutionary War. Some of them were granted their freedom. Some of them were already freedmen. And they settled their families there and they called it New Guinea. And all of the structures associated with this, so several generations of these 4 families, and I love the names, Cato Howe, Prince Goodwin, Plato Turner, and Kwame Quash. Great names. And so what we have left of this is the land itself and the cemetery. And that area has been added to the National Register of Historic Places. But I am so very happy to say that the Plymouth Public Library is also has all of the genealogical work that was done on this family, on the 4 families. And it's about 4 filing cabinets full of all the genealogical history from these 4 families. It is available for anybody to research. I encourage you all, because this is a fantastic story that is largely unknown in Plymouth, but I think it's very important. So please come to the history room and take a look at that. We would love to have you. All right. So we are actually on our last stop. So this is Derby Station, right in that Derby Pond area. And unlike the electric trolley system, this was part of the big rail system that went from Plymouth to Middleborough. And it started in 1882 and went to 1939. It was, and then, so it's a 15-mile line. And once all the lines were laid down, the next day, it was leased out to the Old Colony Railroad for 99 years. So it was part of the Old Colony Railroad system. And then in 1839, it then became part of and known as the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad. It provided passenger service up until about 1927. And that's pretty typical for what is going on with the railroads at this time period. Motor vehicles are just kind of taking over as the main transportation, and you start seeing the decline in the railroad system. So Derby Station hung on for a little bit longer. It continued until 1939 with freight service. And up in this little corner, it was really used by the cranberry industry. So that's why it was able to hold on a little bit longer. So that, before I take questions, I'm just going to put in a plug for my next session. So we're going to be doing part 4, which is going to be covering Manomet. And I'm just doing Manomet because that's a big chunk and lots of history. So we're going to be covering from Rocky Point, right in here, Rocky Hill area, and going all the way down to Indian Hill. And that is going to be Tuesday, July 13th, again at 11 a.m. And I believe we're going to do the same thing. We're going to be doing in-person and Zoom as well. So we hope that you can join us for that one. And so we do have some time left. Were there any questions? Any questions from the Zoom end? Okay. Yeah. Oh, I didn't mention. Yes. Yep. Thank you very much. There was just, oh, okay. So another huge part of North Plymouth's history and its connection is that Bartolomeo Vanzetti lived in North Plymouth, and he did work at Cordage for a while. He did participate in that one and only strike, got himself into a little bit of trouble where he was not hired back. This is when he became a fishmonger. And unfortunately, what he is known for as being taken part as the Sacco and what's known as the Sacco and Vanzetti murder trial, really a whole set of unfortunate circumstances. And it's just a part of early 20th century where there was just a lot of fear from immigration, a lot of fear from workers' rights and union rights and things like that, all kind of mixed in together. And unfortunately, Vanzetti was one of the victims of that whole situation. He was accused of robbing and murdering one of the guardsmen of the shoe company. And so as part of the trial, what came out is that there were so many witnesses in North Plymouth that could place him in North Plymouth on that day where he was said to be taking part of this robbery. And just unfortunately, the way that the biases of the time, those witnesses for the large part were not native English speakers, and their testimony was deemed not sufficient and was thrown out. And unfortunately, he and Sacco, 7 years later, were executed. But this became a worldwide movement to free them. There were chapters of the Sacco and Vanzetti freedom group all over the world. People were raising money specifically to free these two men, understanding just the injustice of it. And really, it wasn't something that the state cleared up, if you can say. In 1977, Governor Dukakis exonerated them 50 years later. And actually this year is the 100th anniversary of that trial, part of which took place right here in Plymouth and right in the current 1820 courthouse building. And if you are at the library, you can go up to the second floor. There is actually currently a small exhibit on this, this unfortunate part of North Plymouth history. And we're very happy to have received a collection of documents from Beltrando Brini, who was a childhood, just a longtime friend and admirer of Vanzetti. And Brini spent his lifetime trying to exonerate his friend. And the library received all of the paperwork from that work that he did. And so some of that is on display upstairs on the second floor in the library if you want to take a look at that. Yes. 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 And actually, I have to say, I also serve on the Historic District Commission. And that building was actually saved in 2016 because of the newly enacted demolition delay bylaw. So that went up for sale and its future was uncertain. And so because of the demo delay, we were able to slow down the process and make sure that it ended up in the right hands. So the building is still there. Actually, if you're heading up Route 3, you can very quickly see it on the left-hand side if you're going north, right? It is tucked in and it is hidden and it's on Transcendentalist Way. No, it is a privately owned, unfortunately, yes. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, it's a lovely little Gothic cottage. I love it. Yes, but it is still, it's in good hands though. Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Okay. All right. So with that in mind, are there any other questions? Okay. All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up there then. I just want to thank you all again for coming down and for joining us by Zoom. And we'll be seeing you in the next session, part 4. We'll be doing Menomet. And again, another quick thank you to Casey, for doing all of the tech for me. Thanks very much. All right. Thanks.